20 years, Ethan. 20 years of nothing. Not a letter, not a word, not even proof you were still alive. And you walk back in here like I'm supposed to, just what? Pick up where we left off. Clara's voice didn't crack, but her hands were shaking so hard she knocked the pen off the counter. The cowboy standing in her doorway didn't flinch, didn't defend himself, just held his hat against his chest and looked at her with eyes that had seen too much and carried every one of those missing years in them. "I know," he said quietly. "I know exactly what I cost you." If this story already has your heart subscribed to our channel, follow along until the very end and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Montana Territory, 1887. The bell above the general store door had rung 10,000 times in Clara Whitmore's life. She knew every variation of that sound. The cheerful jangle when Mrs. Patterson came in for her weekly flour order. The heavy clunk when one of the Halverson boys dragged in a sack of feed. The soft apologetic tinkle when old Mr. Briggs needed credit again and couldn't quite meet her eyes. She had learned to identify a person by the way they opened a door. So when that bell rang on the third Tuesday of June, sharp, deliberate, like someone who had walked a very long way and intended to be heard, Clara didn't even look up from her ledger. "I'll be with you in a moment," she said. Silence. Not the comfortable silence of someone browsing, not the patient silence of someone waiting. Something else. Something weighted like air before a storm. Clara set down her pen. She looked up, and the world she had carefully built over 30 years shifted beneath her feet like loose gravel on a canyon trail. He was tall. That was the first thing. Taller than she would have expected, though she had stopped trying to imagine what he might look like somewhere around her 20th birthday. He wore trail dust, the way working men wore it, not as an embarrassment, but as evidence. His coat was brown leather, worn soft at the elbows. His boots had covered serious ground, and his hat, a wide-brimmed cattleman's hat that had seen real weather, was held in both hands pressed against his chest, as if he was shielding something underneath it, as if his heart needed protecting from whatever came next. His eyes found hers, brown, steady, carrying something heavy that hadn't been there when he was 10 years old. Clara's mouth went dry. No. She told herself that very clearly. Just one word. Firm. Final. No. "You have 30 seconds to leave my store before I throw you out myself." Her voice didn't shake. That was the one mercy. He didn't flinch. He didn't look surprised either. He looked like a man who had rehearsed this moment so many times that he had already accounted for every possible version of it, including this one. "Clara, I said 30 seconds. "I know." "Then why are you still standing there?" He took one slow step forward. Not threatening, not aggressive. The way a man approached a horse that had reason not to trust him. "Because I've been walking toward this door for 20 years, he said quietly. "And I need more than 30 seconds. The air went out of the room. Clara's hands pressed flat against the counter. She could feel the worn wood grain under her palms. She focused on that, the realness of it, the solidity, because the alternative was accepting that Ethan Caldwell was standing 6 feet away from her, and she had absolutely no idea what to do with that. "You don't get to come back," she said. "I understand that." 20 years, Ethan. "I know. You don't get to walk back in here like—" She stopped, steadied herself. "Like you just stepped out for a few minutes. I'm not pretending it was nothing." He took another step, still slow, still careful. "I'm not here to pretend anything. I came back to say what I should have said years ago. And if you tell me to leave after that, I'll go. I'll walk out that door and you'll never see me again." That sounds very appealing right now. Something flickered in his eyes. Not hurt, or not only hurt. Something more complicated. Like a man who expected to pay a debt and had arrived with the full amount. "I promised you something," he said. "When we were children. Don't. I promised I'd come back when I was someone worth coming back to. Ethan. And I'm sorry it took this long. I'm sorry for every year you might have spent wondering. I'm sorry for every question you never got an answer to." He exhaled slowly. "But I kept that promise. I came back. And I need you to know that the boy who made it, he meant every word." Clara stared at him. 20 years of silence. 20 years of a name she'd stopped saying out loud. 20 years of convincing herself that childhood promises were just that, the wishful thinking of people too young to understand how heavy a promise could get when the years piled on top of it. And now, he was here, in her store, with his hat over his heart and his eyes full of things she didn't have the vocabulary for yet. "Get out," she said. He nodded, put his hat back on, turned toward the door. Clara pressed her knuckles against her mouth and stared at the back of his shoulders broader than they should have been, shaped by 20 years of real work, and hated herself for what she said next. "Come back at closing time." He stopped, didn't turn around. 6 o'clock, she said. "If you're still in town." A pause. "I'll be here." The bell rang again as he left, and Clara stood alone in the middle of her store for a long moment, staring at the door, breathing carefully. Then she went back to her ledger. Her handwriting was worse for the next 2 hours. She didn't acknowledge that. She had been 10 years old when she first understood what it felt like to miss someone. It wasn't a lesson she had asked for. The Caldwells had lived 3 properties down from her family's homestead, close enough that she and Ethan had worn a visible path between their 2 places through years of daily crossing. Her mother used to joke that the grass between their farms would never grow back properly because those 2 children had walked it bare. They had been an unlikely pair even then. Clara was the careful one, the one who read every book she could find, who kept her promises in writing, who approached problems the way you approached a stranger's dog, with patience and open hands, and no sudden movements. Her father called her his little magistrate. She took it as a compliment. Ethan was something else entirely. He was the kind of boy who jumped first and calculated the landing on the way down, who talked to horses like they could understand him, and somehow they always seemed to, who woke up every morning believing that today was going to be the most interesting day he'd ever had, and who usually turned out to be right. He drove Clara absolutely crazy. She adored him completely. They argued about everything. About which berry was better for eating and which for throwing. About whether the creek ran faster in spring or autumn. About whether it was smarter to plan ahead or trust your instincts. About 100 small things that mattered enormously to 10-year-olds and nothing at all to anyone else. But they also talked about the things that mattered. The real things. "What do you want to do?" Clara asked him once, lying on her back beneath the old cottonwood near the creek. "When you're grown, I mean." Ethan squinted at the sky like the clouds might have suggestions. "Everything," he said. "That's not an answer." "Sure it is. I want to work cattle. See what's past the mountains. Own land that's mine. Maybe break horses." He turned his head to look at her. "What about you?" "I want to teach," she said immediately. "Children. I want to build a school somewhere and teach children to read." He nodded, completely serious. "You'd be good at that." She looked back at the sky. "You'd be good at the other things too," she said. "The cowboy things." "Obviously." She threw a pine cone at him. He caught it. Of course he caught it. The last day came without warning, the way the worst days always do. Clara was in the store helping her mother sort fabric when Ethan appeared in the doorway, different from his usual arrivals, which tended to involve either running or shouting. He stood there quiet. Smaller somehow, though he hadn't shrunk an inch. She knew before he said anything. "When?" she asked. "Tomorrow morning." She set down the bolt of calico she was holding. "Where?" "Nebraska first, then wherever my father finds work." Her mother made a small sound and found somewhere else to be. She was good at that. Clara walked to the door. Ethan walked with her, and they moved without discussing it to the cottonwood. Their cottonwood, the one that had hosted 10 years of arguments and plans and lazy afternoons. He had brought his pocket knife. She watched him carve 2 sets of initials into the bark, EC plus CW. She wanted to tell him that was silly, That it was the kind of thing children did in stories, not in real life. That carved initials didn't mean anything that a tree didn't remember. She didn't say any of that. "I'll come back," he said. He said it simply without drama, the way he said most things, like it was just a fact he was reporting. "How long?" "I don't know exactly." He folded the knife. "Long enough to become someone worth coming back to." "You're already..." She stopped. He looked at her. "You're already someone worth something," she finished, more quietly than she'd started. He didn't get embarrassed, which she'd expected. He just looked at her steadily, the way he always looked at things he was taking seriously. "When I come back," he said, "I want you to be able to look at me and be proud." "I'm 10 years old, Ethan. I'm not your mother." "You know what I mean." She did know. She hated that she knew. "Fine," she said. "Come back when you're worth something." He grinned. She turned away so he wouldn't see that she was blinking too fast. "Clara." "What?" "I mean it. I'll come back." "People say a lot of things." "I don't." She turned back. He was right about that. In 10 years, she had never once heard Ethan Caldwell say something he didn't mean. He was reckless about a lot of things, but not about his word. "All right," she said. And that was it. The next morning, the Caldwell's wagon rolled out before dawn. Clara was awake to hear it. She didn't go to the window. 20 years. She had told herself somewhere around year 3 that she would stop counting. That was a lie she told herself several more times at regular intervals. The truth was that time kept its own ledger, whether you watched it or not. She had lived a full life. She believed that, and it was true. Her parents had grown older, and the store had gradually become hers, first in practice, then in deed. She had expanded it. Added a lending shelf of books on one wall, a small selection of medical supplies, a corner where the older women could sit and exchange news, while their husbands argued about cattle prices. She had become, as much as anyone could, in a town of 300 souls, indispensable. She had not waited for Ethan Caldwell. She needed to be clear about that, at least to herself. She had dated. She had been courted. She had considered seriously and carefully the proposition put to her by James Aldridge, a decent man, a hard-working farmer who'd asked her to marry him with genuine sincerity and real affection. She had sat with that decision for 3 weeks, weighing it from every angle, and she had said no. Not because of Ethan. She refused to give that reason. She said no because James deserved a woman who was fully present, who could give him a heart without compartments. And Clara, if she was honest with herself, in the deepest, most uncomfortable hours of honesty, still had one compartment she had never fully emptied. Not because she expected him, just because it was still there. A small space locked up with his name on it. Ridiculous, she had told herself 100 times. She told herself that again, now alone in her store at 4:30 in the afternoon, watching the clock move towards 6, with the focused attention of someone trying very hard not to watch the clock. He came back at 5:58. She had been flipping through an invoice she'd already read twice when the bell rang. He was cleaner than he'd been that morning. He'd found somewhere to wash the trail off him. His coat was the same, but his shirt was fresh, and someone, possibly himself, had done something to his hair that suggested an awareness that he was going to be looked at and an effort to be presentable for it. He stopped just inside the door. "You're still here," he said. "It's my store." "Right." A small smile. "Right." Clara closed the invoice. She moved around the counter and gestured toward the 2 chairs she kept near the window, the ones meant for the older women who gossiped on weekday mornings. "Sit," she said. They sat. For a moment neither of them spoke. The late afternoon light came through the window and laid itself across the floor between them. Outside she could hear the ordinary sounds of Willow Creek settling into its evening. A horse somewhere, someone calling a child home for supper. "Where did you go?" she asked finally. "Everywhere." He paused. "Nowhere for a long time. Wyoming eventually. That's where I've been the past 8 years." Ranching? Yes. Successfully. He met her eyes. Yes. She nodded. Something in her chest did something she chose not to examine. Why didn't you write? He was quiet for a moment. The first few years, he said slowly, I had nothing worth writing. I didn't want to write until I had something to say. And then more years passed, and every year it got harder to start, because the silence had gotten so long. He looked at his hands. And because I was afraid. That surprised her. Afraid of what? That you'd moved on. That you'd built your life, and you were happy, and the last thing you needed was a letter from someone you used to know. His jaw tightened slightly. It seemed presumptuous. To assume you were still thinking about me at all. Clara was quiet for a long moment. I wasn't thinking about you, she said carefully. Not the way you might think. I wasn't sitting at a window waiting. I know. I built a good life. I can see that. I didn't need saving. I know that too. He looked at her directly. I didn't come here to save you, Clara. I came back because I made a promise. And because... He stopped. Because... He exhaled slowly. Because for 20 years, everything I built, I kept imagining you there. In the next room. Across the table. Walking beside me on the property. He shook his head. That's probably not what you want to hear. No, she said. Then more honestly, I don't know what I want to hear. He nodded, accepting that. I'm not asking for anything, he said. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I needed you to know I came back. I needed to look you in the eyes and tell you that the promise was real. Clara studied him. This stranger with her childhood friend's eyes. You're different, she said. Yes. I don't know you. Not anymore. No, he agreed. You don't. Then why should I trust anything you're telling me? He thought about that. Genuinely thought about it the way she remembered him thinking, not performing consideration, but actually doing it. You probably shouldn't, he said finally. Not based on tonight. Not based on words. He looked toward the window. I'm planning to stay in Willow Creek for a while if you'll tolerate it. And I intend to be someone you can observe. Observe? Judge for yourself, not based on what I say I am, based on what you see. Clara tilted her head. You want me to watch you. I want the chance to show you. He looked back at her. There's a difference. She considered that for a long moment. Outside, the light was going golden on the street. I don't have a room for rent, she said finally. But the Hendersons take boarders. A pause. That's a yes, he asked. That's an acknowledgement that you're going to need somewhere to sleep if you're staying. He almost smiled. Almost. Clara. What? Thank you for not throwing me out. She stood up, signaling the end of the conversation. I nearly did, she said. I know. He stood as well. I would have come back tomorrow anyway. She looked at him. This weathered, careful, not quite stranger standing in her store with something quiet and terrifyingly sincere in his eyes. I know you would have, she said. And that more than anything else was the problem. Word got out by morning, because of course it did. Willow Creek was not a town where a stranger arrived unnoticed, particularly not when that stranger was apparently known to Clara Whitmore, a woman who was known to everyone and courted by no one, at least not successfully in recent years. Agnes Mercer brought it up at the counter the next day while buying a spool of thread she didn't need. I hear there's a cowboy come to town. There are often cowboys who come through town, Clara said, not ones who know you by name. Thread is 3 cents a spool, Agnes. Agnes put her coins on the counter with the deliberate slowness of someone who intended to get more than thread for her money. My husband says he knows the name Caldwell. Clara kept her face neutral. Most people know most names sooner or later. Daniel says, Agnes. Something in Clara's voice landed like a closed door. The older woman blinked. 3 cents? Clara said pleasantly. "Thank you for coming in." Agnes left with her thread and her news, which would be reshaping itself into something more elaborate by noon, Clara had no doubt. She turned back to the shelf she'd been organizing. Sheriff Daniel Mercer. She had known Daniel for 15 years. He was a competent lawman and a persistent presence in her life. Not unpleasant, not unkind, but persistent in the particular way of men who had decided on something and saw no reason to adjust. He had made his interest in her clear at intervals over the years, with a kind of patient, methodical approach that reminded her of someone laying siege to a very patient fortress. She appreciated him, she supposed. She did not love him. He had never quite accepted those as two separate conditions. She was still thinking about that when the bell rang again and Daniel Mercer himself walked in. He was a solid man, well-built, broad across the shoulders, with a face that would have been handsome in a simpler way if he hadn't developed over the years the habit of looking at things like he was already deciding what to do about them. He looked at her that way now. "Morning, Clara." "Daniel, I hear we had an arrival yesterday." "This town always has arrivals." "Ethan Caldwell." He said the name flat and even, like a man who had already turned it over in his mind several times and put it back in the same spot. "You know him." "I knew him when we were children." "He came to see you specifically." "This is a general store. People come to see it generally." Daniel set his hat on the counter. "Clara." His voice shifted into something more serious. "I want you to be careful." She raised her eyes. "Men who spend years drifting through frontier territory." "He said he ranches in Wyoming." "He said." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "I'm sheriff of this county and I don't have record of him. That means nothing, or it means something, and I think you'd want to know which." Clara studied him. She knew what was underneath this. She wasn't naive, and she had known Daniel Mercer long enough to read the subtext in him like a map she'd read 100 times. "What are you worried about?" she asked. "Your safety." And a pause. "Your judgment," he said. Clara's expression didn't change, but something in her went quiet and cool. "My judgment," she repeated. "It's been 20 years. You don't know who he is anymore." "That's fair." Daniel seemed surprised by the agreement. "So you'll be cautious." "I'm always cautious, Daniel. It's a defining characteristic." She picked up her pen. "Thank you for your concern." He recognized the dismissal. He didn't like it, but he recognized it. "I'll be keeping an eye on him," he said. "I expect you will." He left. Clara stared at her ledger. She didn't write anything for a long moment. My judgment, she thought. He wasn't wrong that she didn't know Ethan anymore. He was absolutely right about that. 20 years made strangers of people. She had watched it happen with others' childhood friends who came through town occasionally and turned out to be unrecognizable under the people they'd become. But there was a difference between not knowing someone and not trusting your own ability to learn. She had spent 30 years reading people across this counter. She would read Ethan Caldwell the same way she read everyone, carefully, without assumptions, and she would decide for herself what she found. He showed up at the store again 2 days later, not to see her, or so he said. He came in for rope and a bag of oats items she noted could have been procured at the feed store down the road. She said nothing about this. "Morning," he said. "Morning." "Nice day." "It is." She wrapped his purchase. He paid. He didn't leave. "Something else?" she asked. He looked at the wall of books. "Do you still lend those?" She glanced at the shelf. "A modest selection," she said. 2 weeks don't crack the spines." He moved to the shelf. She watched from the corner of her eye as he went through them slowly, not browsing, but reading each spine, like it told him something about where he was and who stocked the shelf. He chose 2. She wrote his name in the ledger under borrowers. Ethan Caldwell, the first time she'd written that name down in 20 years. "I'll have them back in 2 weeks, he said. "See that you do." He paused at the door. Thank you, Clara. She didn't look up from the ledger. For the books, she said. You're welcome. He left. She stared at his name in the ledger for approximately 4 seconds longer than was necessary. Then she turned the page. So, on the 5th day, something happened that had nothing to do with her and everything to do with what kind of man had come back to Willow Creek. She heard it from the Henderson boy who came breathless into the store at mid-morning. Miss Whitmore, you know that cowboy staying at our place? I'm aware of him. He pulled Martin Halverson's boy out from under a kicked horse this morning. The animal came down wrong, and the boy went under it, and the boy stopped to breathe. He moved so fast, nobody else even got there in time. Clara set down her pen very slowly. Is the boy hurt? Just scared mostly, couple of bruises. But if that cowboy hadn't... Another breath. Mr. Halverson's been talking about it all morning. Clara nodded. She said nothing. After the Henderson boy left, she stood at the window for a moment. She wasn't naive enough to count one incident as a character reference. People did brave things accidentally. Proximity and instinct weren't evidence of a person's soul. But she also wasn't going to pretend she hadn't heard it. She went back to her work. He returned the books on the 14th day. 3 days early, she said. I read fast. Did you like them? He set them on the counter carefully. The Twain, he said. I'd read it before actually, years ago, but it hits differently when you're older. Something in that sentence caught her. What hits differently? He thought about it. The idea that you can leave a place, he said, and still carry it with you. That wherever you go, the early parts of your life are still traveling with you. You don't shed them. You just add to them. She looked at him. That's a generous reading. Is it wrong? I'm not sure it's what Twain intended. Readers aren't obligated to what writers intended, he said. You told me that once, when we were 8 and arguing about a story your mother read to us. Clara stared at him. He said it so naturally. As if referencing 8-year-old conversations was just part of his vocabulary, now material he had carried and consulted over the years. You remember that, she said. I remember a lot of things. She didn't know what to do with that. So she did what she always did. She noted it, shelved it, and moved on. 2 more if you want. He chose 2 more. She wrote his name in the ledger again. He left. She stood looking at his name in the ledger for longer than 4 seconds this time. She didn't turn the page quite as quickly. On the 11th day of Ethan Caldwell's presence in Willow Creek, something shifted in the way the town looked at him. Not because of anything dramatic, because Orville Steen's fence came down in a rainstorm, and the next morning Ethan was there before first light, helping repair it along with the Halverson brothers and 2 other men before Orville even knew it had happened. She heard about it from Orville himself, who came to the store in the afternoon, still wearing the expression of a man who has been astonished by something decent and hasn't quite processed it yet. I didn't ask, he said. No, Clara agreed. Didn't know him. He don't know me. Apparently he knows what a downed fence looks like in wet soil. Orville scratched his chin. What kind of man does a thing like that? Clara looked at the shelf behind Orville's left shoulder. I'm still working on that question, she said. And then Daniel Mercer started talking. It began subtly the way these things always did. A word here, a suggestion there. The kind of conversation that didn't look like what it was until you'd already had it. It was Ellen Bryce who first brought it to Clara, directly standing at the counter with a look of careful neutrality that meant she'd been sitting on something for a day or 2. I heard something, Ellen said, about that cowboy of yours. He's not mine. You know what I mean. Clara waited. Daniel Mercer's been saying around, just around, that men who spend that many years on the frontier tend to pick up habits. That the honest ones come home quick, but the ones who stay gone a long time... Ellen paused. He didn't say anything specific. Of course not. Just implications. Right. Clara kept her face very still. And what does the town think? Ellen looked uncertain. People like what they've seen of him. The Halversons, Orville. But Daniel has a badge and 20 years of local standing. He's not wrong that we don't know the whole story. No, Clara said carefully. He's not wrong about that. She absorbed it. After Ellen left, she thought about it for a long time. Daniel wasn't inventing something from nothing. The honest version of his concern was reasonable. Nobody knew Ethan Caldwell's full story. Nobody could verify 20 years of a man's life from the outside. But the dishonest version, the version that began with, "I want this man gone," and worked backward to find its justifications, that was also present. And Clara had been reading people across a counter long enough to know which she was looking at. She ran into Ethan at the livery that afternoon. Not by design. She needed to speak with the farrier about a delivery, and Ethan was there brushing down his horse with the specific, focused attention of a man whose relationship with his animal was the longest continuous relationship in his life. He noticed her before she noticed him. "Clara." She stopped. "Ethan." He kept brushing. The horse, a buckskin gelding built for long work, leaned slightly into the brushstrokes. "He's handsome," she said, nodding at the horse. "Best I've ever worked with. Found him half-starved outside of Cheyenne 6 years ago." He ran a hand along the animal's neck. "Took about 4 months before he'd let me near him. And now? Now he tells me things." Clara raised an eyebrow. Ethan glanced at her. A small smile. "I know how that sounds. You always talk to animals. They're honest," he said simply. "They don't tell you what you want to hear. They just react to what you actually are." She studied him. "I heard Daniel Mercer's been talking," she said. The brushing slowed. Just slightly. "I figured he might," Ethan said. "Is there anything he might say that I should know directly from you first?" He set the brush down, turned to face her. "I wasn't always the man I am now," he said. "I made choices in my 20s I'm not proud of. I worked with men I should have walked away from. I didn't for a while live up to the promise I made to myself, let alone to you." She held his gaze. "Keep going. I found my way back. It took time and it wasn't clean, but I found it." His jaw was steady. "If Daniel Mercer has specific accusations to make, I'll answer them directly. If it's rumors and implications," he exhaled. "I can't outrun a rumor. I can only show you who I am now." "That's what you keep saying." "Because it's the only thing I have to offer." She thought about that. "What were you," she asked, "before you found your way back?" He was quiet for a moment. "Lost," he said. Just that one word. Clara looked at him. This man who had crossed the frontier and returned with dust on his boots and something careful in his eyes, offering nothing but the daily evidence of who he was. "You should know," she said, "that I'm going to talk to Daniel." "All right." "And that whatever he tells me, I'm going to weigh it myself." "I know." "And that I'm not going to be swayed by your fence-fixing and your fence-rescuing children and your reading books. I'm not trying to sway you." "You absolutely are." The corner of his mouth moved. "Maybe a little," he admitted. She turned to go. "Clara," she stopped. "Whatever you decide," he said, "I'm grateful you've let me try." She didn't answer that. She walked out of the livery. Her chest did that thing again, the complicated thing, and she told it firmly to stop. It didn't stop. She talked to Daniel that evening. He was careful, professional. He gave her facts wrapped in concerns, wrapped in a care for her safety that she believed was real, even knowing his other motives. There had been questions years ago about a cattle dispute Ethan had been tangentially involved in. No charges, no conviction, a name that appeared in a record and then disappeared. It wasn't nothing. It wasn't the dark revelation Daniel seemed to be hoping she'd receive it as. "That's what you have," she said. Daniel set his hands on his desk. Clara, I'm trying to protect you. I know you are. You shouldn't. Daniel. She looked at him directly. How long have you known me? 15 years. In 15 years have I ever made a decision I didn't think through completely? He was quiet. Then let me think this one through, she said. She stood up. And Daniel? She paused at the door. Whatever else is motivating you here, I've noticed it. I want you to know that I've noticed it. And I'd appreciate you being honest with both of us about it. She left before he could answer. She walked home in the cooling evening air thinking. She thought about a 10-year-old boy carving initials into a cottonwood tree. She thought about the patience required to walk toward a closed door for 20 years. She thought about a man who said with no performance and no plea, I was lost, and left it there plain and bare for her to do whatever she wanted with. She thought about the question she hadn't asked yet. And she thought about the answer she suspected she already knew. She wasn't ready to say it out loud. But somewhere in the locked compartment, something very small and very stubborn had started to open. She didn't sleep well that night, not because she was afraid, because she was beginning against her best judgment to hope, and hope she had learned was the most expensive thing a person could afford. She didn't sleep well that night, and she was at the store by 5:30 the next morning, which meant she was there when the Henderson boy came running before the rest of Willow Creek had finished its first cup of coffee. Miss Whitmore? He was breathless again, but this time it wasn't excitement. This time his face was the particular pale of someone who had seen something they weren't ready to have seen. There's trouble at the Halverson property. Clara was already reaching for her coat. What kind of trouble? Riders came through last night, tore down what Ethan and the others fixed, and... He swallowed. They left a message on what was left of the fence post. She stopped. What kind of message? It said next time it won't be the fence. The store went very quiet. Clara hung her coat back on the hook. She thought for exactly 3 seconds. Go find Sheriff Mercer, she said. Tell him I said it's not optional. The boy ran. Clara stood at her counter and thought about the fact that the trouble had started precisely 11 days after Ethan Caldwell arrived in Willow Creek. She thought about that carefully, and she did not like the shape of what she was thinking. She went to find Ethan herself. He was at the livery already saddled, which told her he'd heard before she had. He was checking the cinch on the buckskin with the focused economy of a man who moved faster when things got serious, less visible, not more. You know, she said from the doorway. Halverson sent word at first light. Are you going out there? He looked at her. Yes. Alone, unless someone's coming with me. Clara walked in and looked at the buckskin. I can ride, she said. I know you can. I'm not asking your permission. I didn't offer any. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned toward the stall where the livery kept the bay mare she occasionally hired. Give me 5 minutes, she said. He gave her 4, and didn't mention the difference. They rode out to the Halverson property side by side, and Clara noticed the way Ethan moved on horseback. Easy practice, the kind of seat that came from years of covering serious ground. He wasn't performing comfort. He was simply comfortable the way water was wet. It told her things about the 20 years she hadn't been there to see. They didn't speak much on the way out, but when they were close enough to see the property, Clara pulled up slightly. Ethan, he pulled up beside her. Is this connected to you? He was quiet for one beat. I don't know yet, he said. But it might be. It might be. She looked at the property ahead of them. Then tell me what I'm riding into, she said. Because I've got 30 people in this town who depend on me to have good judgment, and I'd rather know what I'm dealing with before I walk into the middle of it. He turned to look at her directly. There's a man named Garrett Cole, he said. I knew him in Wyoming. We had a dispute over land, legitimate title dispute filed properly resolved in my favor by the county court 3 years ago. He paused. He didn't accept the resolution. He followed you here. I don't know that for certain. But you suspect it. Another pause. Longer. Yes, he said. Clara absorbed this. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wasn't certain. And because I didn't want to. He stopped. To what? His jaw was set. I didn't want to bring trouble to your door before I knew if trouble was coming. I thought maybe I'd left it behind me. She stared at him. Ethan? I know. You should have told me. I know that too. She turned her horse back toward the property. Then start telling me things, she said. Because I can handle the truth. What I cannot handle is being the last to know. She rode ahead. He followed. And if she rode a little harder than necessary, she figured she was entitled. The scene at the Halverson property was worse up close. The fence repair from the previous week was completely destroyed, not just knocked down, but methodically dismantled post by post in a way that communicated patience and intent. Martin Halverson stood with his oldest son Kurt, looking at the wreckage with the expression of a man counting a cost he couldn't afford. When he saw Ethan, something crossed his face. Not accusation, not yet, but awareness. The kind that asked a question without speaking it. Ethan got down from his horse before Martin could say anything. I owe you an explanation, Ethan said. Martin looked at him steadily. I'll take one, Martin said. Ethan explained directly, and without softening it, the land dispute in Wyoming. Garrett Cole, the court resolution, the 3 years of uneasy quiet that may have broken when Ethan left the territory. Martin listened. Kurt, who was 19 and felt things loudly, started to say something sharp. His father put a hand on his arm. Let him finish. Ethan finished. Martin looked at the fence wreckage for a long moment. So you brought this here, he said. Not an accusation, a fact being named. Possibly, Ethan said. I'm sorry for that, genuinely. What are you going to do about it? Find out if it's coal, and if it is, deal with it. How? Directly. Ethan's voice was flat. The way you deal with men who won't accept legal answers. Clara watched Martin Halverson's face do the calculation, weighing what he knew of Ethan from 11 days of observation against what he was hearing now, against the wrecked fence and the threat left on it. You fix what you brought, Martin said finally. I intend to. Martin nodded once. That was the end of the agreement between them. Simple and clean, the way serious men made agreements. Clara felt something settle slightly in her chest. Then Daniel Mercer arrived. He came with 2 deputies, which was more official response than a damaged fence typically warranted, and Clara knew before he dismounted that he'd heard a version of this story already, and had ridden out with an already formed opinion. His eyes went straight to Ethan. Caldwell. Ethan turned. Sheriff? I think you and I need to have a conversation. Happy to. Daniel's eyes moved briefly to Clara. Something passed through them, a quick flash of something she could only read as frustration, followed by the professional blankness he wore when he was managing himself in public. Privately, Daniel said. Whatever you have to say to me, Ethan said evenly, can be said in front of the people whose property this is. A pause. Daniel recalculated. There are reports. Daniel said carefully. That placed Garrett Cole in the county 2 days ago. Cole has a history of intimidation. We have it on record from Wyoming. I've been corresponding with the county sheriff there. Ethan nodded. All right. You knew Cole might follow you. I considered it a possibility I hoped wasn't coming. That's not the same as telling me about it when you arrived. No, Ethan said. It's not, and you're right to take issue with that. I should have come to you day one and put you in the picture. Daniel hadn't expected the direct agreement. Clara could see him adjust. Why didn't you? Because I didn't want to start my time here by walking into the sheriff's office and introducing myself as a man with potential enemies. Seemed like a poor first impression. A slight pause. I was wrong about that. Mercer looked at him for a long moment. If Cole is here, he said slowly, he's not just going to rattle some fences. Men like that escalate. I know what men like that do, Ethan said, quietly, without elaboration. Something in that quietness landed differently on the group around them. Clara felt it. Martin felt it. Even Kurt, who'd been vibrating with 19-year-old indignation, went still. "I'll deal with Cole," Ethan said. "I'm asking for the chance to do it right through you, through proper means the way it should be done. But I need you to work with me, not around me." Daniel's jaw worked. He looked at Clara. Clara said nothing. She held his gaze and let him decide without her weight on the scale. "Come to my office this afternoon," Daniel said finally. "Both of us together. You tell me everything you know about Cole, everything, and we figure out how to handle this." "I'll be there at 2 o'clock, Ethan said. Daniel nodded, turned his horse, rode back toward town with his deputies behind him. The silence he left was the kind that needed a moment to breathe. Martin Halverson looked at his fence. "I'll need to start on this again tomorrow," he said. "I'll be here," Ethan said. "So will I," Clara said. Both men looked at her. She looked back at both of them with the expression she used when she'd made a decision and wasn't interested in discussing it. Neither of them said anything. That was the correct response. She and Ethan rode back toward town mostly in silence, but a different kind of silence than the one on the way out. That one had been the silence of two people being careful. This one was the silence of two people who had stood in the same place and done the same thing and were still standing. When they were close to town, Ethan said, "You didn't have to come this morning." "I know. But you did. I told you, my judgment is my own. I wanted to see how you handled it. And..." She looked at the road ahead. "You told Martin the truth immediately," she said. "You didn't make excuses. You offered to fix what you brought." A pause. "That's more than most men would have done." He didn't respond right away. "That's not a compliment," she added. "It's an observation." "I understand the difference." "Good." They reached the edge of town. She pulled the mare to a stop. "Ethan, this Garrett Cole." He stopped beside her. "How dangerous?" He looked at her steadily. "Dangerous enough that I want you to be careful," he said. "And smart. And not in the middle of anything I can't control." "That's not an answer. It's the honest answer," he said. "Which means I don't know exactly what he'll do. I know what he's capable of. And I know I'm not going to let anything happen to this town because of a fight that started with me." She looked at him. "If something happens," she said, "you tell me. Immediately. You don't decide to spare me the difficulty of knowing things that affect my community." "Agreed." "I mean it." "I know you mean it." The corner of his mouth moved. Just slightly. "You always meant things." She turned the mare toward the livery. 2 o'clock, she said. "Don't be late to Mercer's office." "Yes, ma'am." She heard the small warmth in those two words and refused to let herself respond to it. She was 30 years old and sensible and not going to be undone by a tone of voice. She was mostly successful in this. She returned the mare, walked back to her store, and opened the ledger she hadn't looked at since 5:30 in the morning. The numbers blurred slightly. She blinked them back into focus. She had a business to run. She ran it. The afternoon moved. The way afternoons moved in Willow Creek, with the particular rhythms of a town going about its work, the store filling and emptying with the ordinary traffic of people who needed things and knew where to get them. Mrs. Patterson came in at noon and did not mention Ethan Caldwell, which meant she was waiting for someone else to open the topic first and planned to have the best contribution ready. 3 farmers came in together, ostensibly for supplies, actually for the information economy that a general store always ran parallel to its inventory. Clara gave them supplies and no information. Agnes Mercer sent her niece with a list and a message Daniel says to be careful. Clara sent the niece back with the supplies and no reply. At 2:15, Ellen Bryce came in looking like someone who had walked past the sheriff's office recently. "They're still in there," she said, as if Clara had asked. "Good. Together. Talking. No shouting." Clara wrote a number in her ledger. "That's also good," she said. Ellen lingered. "You went out to the Halverson place this morning," Ellen said. "I did." "With him?" "Yes." "Clara." Ellen's voice shifted into something more careful. "People are talking. People always talk. They're saying, some of them, that you're taking his side, that you knew him when you were children, and now you're letting that cloud your Ellen. I'm not saying I think that. I'm telling you what's being said. Clara set down her pen. She looked at her friend directly. Do I strike you as a woman who makes decisions with her feelings? Ellen considered this honestly. No, she said. You're the least feelings-driven person I know. Then tell anyone who's curious that I went to assess the situation on behalf of the community the same way I would for any situation that affects people I'm responsible to. Ellen nodded, absorbed this. Is he a good man? She asked quietly. Not gossip, a genuine question. Clara looked at the ledger. I don't know yet, she said honestly. But I'm finding out. Ellen left satisfied with that answer, which was more than Clara could say for herself, because the honest version, the version she wouldn't say out loud, was that she was finding out, and what she was finding was complicated, and complications were the one thing she had never quite learned to manage as cleanly as she managed everything else. At 4:30, Ethan came into the store. He looked like a man who had spent 2 hours in a room with Daniel Mercer and come out the other side still intact. Slightly tighter around the jaw than usual, but intact. How did it go? She asked. Better than it could have, he said. Mercer's sharp, and fair underneath everything else. Underneath everything else. He doesn't like me, but he's honest enough to work with me anyway when the work matters. He leaned against the counter. He's got a line on where Cole is camped, about 8 miles east, 3 men with him. What's the plan? Mercer goes out tomorrow with his deputies. Legal approach. Cole doesn't technically have a warrant on him here yet, but if he's connected to the fence damage, Mercer can hold him. And if Cole doesn't cooperate with a legal approach, Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then we find out what kind of man Mercer is when the law needs backing up. Clara thought about this. And you? I'll be available, he said. Not out front. Behind the sheriff where I belong in this situation. She studied him. That's the right answer, she said. I know. Most men wouldn't give it. Most men haven't thought as hard as I have about what happens when you act before you think. He said it without drama, the same way he'd said lost at the livery. Just a fact he was carrying. She believed him. That was the thing she kept coming back to. She believed him not with the blind believing of a woman blinded by history, but with the careful believing of someone who had been watching and kept finding the evidence pointed the same direction. That frightened her more than it should have. Go get some sleep, she said. If Mercer rides tomorrow, you should be rested. Yes, ma'am. He pushed off the counter, picked up his hat, paused. Clara. She looked up. Thank you, he said, for this morning, for coming with me, for not... He paused. For not deciding before you had the information. She held his gaze. That's just good sense, she said. Maybe. Something in his eyes shifted slightly. But not everybody has it. He left. Clara stood looking at the door for a moment. Then she turned back to her ledger with the air of someone who had made up her mind about something and wasn't ready to say what it was yet. The next morning came gray and cold with a flat sky that felt like held breath. Mercer left at first light with his 2 deputies and an additional man, Tom Riggs, who supplemented the law when situations required it. Ethan rode out with them, slightly behind, which Clara had learned meant he had negotiated his presence carefully and wasn't there as an agent of the law, but as a witness and backup. She knew this because he'd come to the store at 5:45 to tell her directly as agreed. I'll be back by midday, he said. And if you're not, then send for Mercer's counterpart in the next county and tell them where we went. She looked at him. Be careful, she said. He looked back at her. I intend to. A pause. That's the first time you've said that to me. Don't read into it. Of course not. He left. She ran the store. She served Mrs. Patterson. She gave credit to old Briggs. She solved a disagreement between 2 farmers about a posted price. She inventoried the back shelf. She drank 2 cups of coffee and found them both tasteless. At 11:42, Ethan walked back through the door. Intact. Dusty. One additional line of tension across his shoulders that hadn't been there when he left, but present and walking and unhurt. Clara's hands, which she hadn't realized were pressed flat on the counter, relaxed. "Cole?" she asked. "In custody," Ethan said. He went along with it once Mercer had numbers and legal standing. Men like Cole push against what gives way. When it doesn't give, they mostly fold. Mostly. His 3 men left separately, no charge to hold them on. "So this isn't over." "Cole's over," he said. "The legal case is clear. Fence destruction threatening message prior record. He won't be a problem. But his men? Likely gone. But yes, not over. He met her eyes. "I want to be honest with you about that." "Good." He was quiet for a moment. "I also want to tell you something else," he said. She waited. "This morning when we found Cole's camp, he said something. About me." Ethan's jaw was steady. He said I'd stolen what was his. The land, the cattle, my reputation in Wyoming. He paused. He said men like me always found women to hide behind. The air went very still. Clara watched his face. "I want you to know," Ethan said, "that I didn't come back here to hide behind you. Not behind your respectability, or your community standing, or your history with me." His voice was low and completely level. "If I brought trouble here, and that trouble touched you, or anyone you care about, that's on me. And I'm sorry. And I will spend whatever time it takes making sure this town knows that connection to me doesn't cost them anything." Clara looked at him for a long time. "Ethan?" "Yes. Cole is a man who lost a legal dispute and can't accept it. Whatever he says about you reflects him." She paused. "I've been watching you for 2 weeks. I don't see a man hiding." Something moved through his expression quickly. Something she almost missed, because it was gone as fast as it came. But she saw it. Relief. Real relief. The kind that didn't perform itself. "Also," she said more quietly, "I don't hide people. Not behind me, not behind anything. I'm a woman who runs a business in a small town and knows exactly what she's doing." She paused. "If I'm involved in something, it's because I chose to be." He nodded. And then before she could register what was happening, his hand moved across the counter and covered hers. Just for a moment. Just briefly. Just the weight of his hand over hers, warm and careful and present. Then he stepped back. "I know," he said, quietly. "I've always known that about you." He left. Clara stood at her counter and looked at the hand he'd touched. She didn't move for approximately 30 seconds. Then she went back to work. But that night, lying in bed and listening to Willow Creek settle into its silence, Clara Whitmore allowed herself to acknowledge for the first time quietly alone, where no one could observe her judgment at work, that the compartment she had locked 20 years ago was not going to stay locked much longer, and that the man responsible for it wasn't the boy she'd preserved behind that lock. He was someone entirely new, someone she was against all her careful sense beginning to want to know completely. She turned over. She shut her eyes. She told herself to sleep. She didn't sleep for a long time. She told herself it was purely practical, the reason she started saving him a cup of coffee on mornings when she knew he'd be passing by. The store opened at 7. He was usually up before 6. The Henderson place where he boarded was 3 buildings down, and his route to wherever he was going almost always took him past her door. She had a pot on the stove. Coffee was not sentiment. Coffee was a hot beverage served to anyone who came through a general store before the town fully woke up. She told herself this. She was not sure she believed herself. On the 3rd morning of this arrangement, which she had not announced and he had not commented on, they had simply arrived at it together, the way 2 careful people sometimes arrive at things through proximity and repetition rather than conversation. He came in at 6:50, sat down in the chair by the window and said, "Daniel Mercer asked me something yesterday." Clara poured without looking up. "What did he ask?" "He asked if I intended to stay in Willow Creek permanently." She set the pot down. What did you tell him? Ethan wrapped both hands around the cup, looked at the steam rising from it. I told him that depended on factors I didn't fully control yet. Clara sat down across from him. That's a careful answer. It's an honest one. He looked at her. I have a ranch in Wyoming that needs running. I have men working my land who depend on me for their wages. I can't stay indefinitely without a reason that justifies leaving all of that behind. A pause. Or without a reason to bring it with me. The room was quiet enough that she could hear the wood in the stove shifting. Ethan? She said carefully. I'm not asking you anything, he said. Not today. I just want you to know where I stand, so you're not operating without the full picture. You said you'd give me the full picture. I'm giving it to you. She looked at him. This man with her childhood friend's eyes and 20 years of his own history behind them. How long can you stay? She asked. Another 3 weeks. Maybe 4 if I write to my foreman and ask him to extend. And after that I go back to Wyoming. He held her gaze. Unless something changes. Something in the air between them was different from any air they'd breathed together before, denser, somehow carrying more weight per breath. Clara felt it pressing against her chest from the inside. She stood up, picked up her pen. Then you have 3 weeks, she said, to let me make up my mind. He looked at her. That's all I'm asking, he said. She went back to her ledger. He finished his coffee and left. She didn't watch him go. She absolutely watched him go. 3 days later, the first letter arrived. It came from Wyoming, and it was addressed to Ethan at the Henderson place, and she would not have known about it except that Ruth Henderson mentioned it in passing while buying salt pork, adding with Ruth's particular brand of gentle curiosity that it had been a long letter sealed twice, and that Ethan had read it in the kitchen and sat very still for a long time afterward before going upstairs. Clara filed that information away and said nothing. That afternoon, Ethan came into the store without his usual forward steadiness. He moved like a man carrying something he hadn't figured out where to put yet. She waited. She had learned in 3 weeks of watching him that Ethan Caldwell didn't respond well to being pushed toward information. He arrived at it in his own time, at his own pace, and pushing only made him careful in ways that were harder to read. So she waited. He bought tobacco he didn't need. He looked at the bookshelf without seeing it. He picked up a piece of rope, set it down, picked it up again. Ethan, she said. He looked at her. Whatever it is, just say it. He set the rope down. My foreman wrote, he said. There's been an offer on the Wyoming property. She went still. What kind of offer? A serious one. A ranching consortium out of Colorado. They want the land, the cattle, the water rights. His jaw was set. It's a fair offer. More than fair. It would clear every debt I carry and leave enough to start fresh somewhere else. Are you thinking of taking it? He looked at her for a long moment. 6 weeks ago, I would have said no without thinking, he said. That land is mine. I built it. The idea of selling it to a consortium felt like, he paused, like losing a fight I'd already won. And now I'm standing in a town where I grew up, where the person I built all of it for in the back of my mind is standing 6 feet away from me. He exhaled slowly. And I'm not sure what the land means anymore if the reason I built it is here instead of there. Clara put her pen down very deliberately. This was the moment she had been managing toward circling around it carefully for 3 weeks, and now it was here, and she found she was not as prepared for it as she'd believed. Ethan, she said. I know, he said. I'm not asking you to decide anything based on my property decisions. I'm not using it to pressure you. He stopped. Tried again. I need you to know that I'm not half in. I was never half in. Whatever I do about the offer, that's separate. But you should know that the reason I'm weighing it differently than I would have 6 weeks ago is you. The store felt very small. Don't decide anything yet, she said. All right. Give it a week. All right. And in the meantime, she picked up her pen, put it down again. Come to supper tonight. My house 6 o'clock. I'll cook. You can tell me about Wyoming, what it actually looks like, what you built there." She looked at him steadily. "I want to know what you're asking me to consider." He was quiet for a moment. 6 o'clock, he said. "Don't be late." He wasn't late. He arrived at 5:58, which she was beginning to understand was his version of punctuality, close enough that no one waited early enough that he'd been standing outside for 2 minutes collecting himself. She found out about the 2 minutes because she saw him through the window. She did not open the door early. She waited until 6 exactly. She was not going to become a woman who watched for men through windows regardless of what her eyes had apparently decided to do on their own. He came in and sat at her kitchen table like he had done it before, which he hadn't. But there was a comfort in the way he occupied the space that felt less like presumption and more like someone recognizing a place they'd been heading toward for a long time. She cooked. He talked. He told her about Wyoming, not the landscape, not descriptions, but the work of it. The 4 a.m. mornings. The specific exhaustion of a cattleman's body at the end of driving season. The first winter, he'd had his own land when a storm came in fast, and he'd lost 14 head, and spent 2 days digging out and feeling the weight of ownership in a way he'd never felt it before, as responsibility, as cost, not just as pride. He told her about his foreman, a man named Ike, who had 3 fingers on his left hand and the sharpest eye for weather Clara had ever heard described by someone else. He told her about the creek that ran through the north pasture and froze solid in January, and what the sound of it thawing in March sounded like, which was, he said, the best sound he knew. She listened. She listened the way she listened to everything, completely without performing attention, just genuinely receiving it. And she felt the strange vertigo of understanding something, for the first time, that the life he'd built in Wyoming was real. It wasn't an abstraction. It wasn't a cowboy story. It was a man's actual life, with its costs and its sounds and its cold winters and its very specific foreman with incomplete fingers, and he was laying it out for her to look at, not to impress her, to show her. There was a difference. She cleared the dishes. He helped without asking, which she noticed. They sat with coffee afterward, and it was the most comfortable evening Clara had spent in longer than she wanted to calculate. "Tell me something," she said. "Anything. What did you think about all those years, when you thought about coming back?" He looked at his coffee. "Honestly, always. I thought about whether you'd be angry," he said. "That was the first thing for a long time. Whether coming back would feel to you like an intrusion on a life I had no right to interrupt." He paused. "Then later, after I'd been building the ranch for a few years, I started thinking about what I'd say, trying to write it in my head. It was always wrong, too much explaining, too much justifying." "So what did you decide to say?" He looked up. "What I said. That I came back because I promised, and that the rest was up to you." Clara turned her cup slowly in her hands. "That was the right thing to say," she told him. "I know. It took me about 15 years to figure that out." She almost smiled. She caught it at the last moment. He saw it anyway. He didn't comment on it, which was the correct thing to do. She walked him to the door at 9 o'clock. He stopped on the threshold. "Clara." "Don't," she said. He stopped. "Not tonight," she said. "I know what you're going to say, and I'm not ready to answer it yet, so don't say it tonight." He looked at her. "All right," he said quietly. "Thank you for coming. Thank you for cooking. It was practical. You needed to eat." "Of course." He stepped off the threshold, turned. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Ethan." She closed the door. She stood with her back against it for a moment. She admitted to herself in the dark of her own hallway, in very serious trouble. The next morning, Daniel Mercer came into the store before she opened it. She knew from the way he knocked 3 times, evenly spaced official, that this wasn't a social call. She unlocked the door. He came in without the hat this time. That was the tell. Daniel Mercer always had his hat on when he was being professional. Without it, he was just a man, and just a man was harder to manage. "I need to tell you something," he said. She gestured to the chairs. They sat. "I had a telegram from the Wyoming County Sheriff last night," he said. "About Caldwell." She kept her face neutral. "It's not what I expected," Daniel said, and something in his voice made her pay sharper attention. "Tell me. The land dispute I told you about, the one with Cole. I had the full record pulled." He looked at his hands. Caldwell was right. The title was clean. The court found in his favor because the evidence was clear. Cole had been running cattle on land that wasn't his for 6 years before Ethan filed. He paused. "The Wyoming sheriff says Ethan was known there as a fair dealer, paid his debts, treated his hands well, no complaints from neighbors." Clara said nothing. "There's more," Daniel said. She waited. 3 years ago, there was a fire at a homesteader's property north of Ethan's ranch. Family of 5 parents, 3 children. Lost everything. Daniel looked up. "Ethan put them up on his property for 8 months while they rebuilt. Fed them. Paid for the lumber himself." The store was very quiet. "You looked into him," Clara said. "I did. Because you wanted to find something." A pause. "Yes," Daniel said, quietly. "I wanted to find something." He looked at her. "I didn't find what I was looking for. I found the opposite." This, she realized, was costing him significantly. "Daniel," she said carefully, "I'm not finished." He straightened slightly. "I'm telling you this because you deserve the full picture, not the version I was building." His jaw was tight. "Caldwell's a good man. I don't like him being here. I don't like what his being here means for the situation between us. But he's a good man." Clara looked at him. She saw very clearly what this admission had required of him. She understood the weight of it, and she respected him for it in a way she hadn't quite managed to before, not despite his motivation for looking, but because of the honesty it took to report back what he'd found. "Thank you," she said. "I'm not asking for anything." He stood up. "I just needed you to have the truth." He picked up his hat, put it on. Was himself again professional, managed, contained. "Daniel," she said. He stopped. "You're a good man too," she said. "I want you to know that I see that." He looked at her for a long moment. "Just not in the way I'd hoped," he said. "No," she said. Gently. "Not in that way." He nodded once, left. Clara sat alone in the store for a full 2 minutes. Then she stood up, unlocked the front door, and opened for business. She told Ethan about Daniel's visit that afternoon. She told him directly all of it. The telegram, the Wyoming record, the family after the fire. She watched his face as she talked, and what she saw there was not satisfaction or vindication. What she saw was something much simpler. Discomfort. The particular discomfort of a private man having private things said out loud. "You didn't need to verify me," he said. "I didn't ask him to." Still, "Ethan." She put her pen down. "I told you I was watching. That means I receive information from wherever it comes, including from a man who was looking for something bad and found something good instead." He was quiet. "He told you about the Marsdens," he said. "The family." He did. Ethan looked at the counter. "That wasn't—" He stopped. Tried again. "That wasn't a performance. That wasn't me being the kind of man I wanted people to see. I know. I had the space. I had the lumber money. They had children." "I know," she said again. He looked up. "It matters to me," she said simply, "that you did it when no one was watching." Something shifted in his face, and Clara felt that shift in her own chest simultaneously, as if they were still connected by the invisible string of that childhood cottonwood, as if all the years between hadn't cut it, but only stretched it until coming back had pulled it taut again. She was not ready to say any of that out loud, but she knew it now the way you know things that have decided themselves without asking your permission. The town voted on Garrett Cole's fate at the county level 2 weeks after his arrest, and the outcome was what the legal record required, held on charges transferred to Wyoming jurisdiction, where the prior pattern was documented, unlikely to resurface in Willow Creek's particular orbit. The town exhaled. The tension that had sat over Willow Creek like held weather finally broke, and in its breaking, something changed in how the community looked at Ethan Caldwell. Not because he had played the hero he'd specifically stayed behind the law in that situation, but because the threat he'd been associated with was gone, and what remained was simply a man who had been here a month and had consistently, and without drama, been someone the town could point to without embarrassment. Martin Halverson told 3 people directly that Ethan Caldwell was the hardest worker he'd seen on a fence line in 20 years. The Hendersons told anyone who asked that he was the quietest boarder they'd ever had, which in a house with 4 children was worth noting. Old Orville Steen stopped Clara on the street and said without preamble, "That cowboy of yours is all right." Clara said he wasn't hers. Orville said, "Mm-hmm," in a tone that suggested he had formed his own opinion about that and wasn't going to change it for politeness. She let it go. But on the morning of his 28th day in Willow Creek, 3 days before the outer edge of the window he'd given himself, Ethan came into the store and didn't take the chair by the window. He stood at the counter. She looked up. His face was the face of a man who had made a decision and was carrying the weight of it, clearly not hiding it. "I wrote to my foreman," he said. "About the offer. About coming out here." He kept his eyes on hers. "I told him to hold the offer. Not to accept it, not to decline it. To hold it." She set her pen down. "Why?" "Because I want to propose something to you, and I need you to hear it without feeling like you're deciding my property future at the same time." "Ethan, 3 minutes," he said. "Give me 3 minutes. Then you can say whatever you want." She pressed her lips together and nodded. He took one breath. "I'm not going to tell you I love you," he said, "because that word between people who've known each other 3 weeks and 20 years simultaneously is complicated. And I think you'd distrust it, and I'd feel dishonest saying something that simple for something that's this complicated." She said nothing. He had 3 minutes. "What I'm going to tell you," he continued, "is that in 20 years I measured every significant thing I did by a standard I never quite articulated. Whether I could tell you about it and feel like I'd done it right. Whether it would hold up under your particular kind of looking." He paused. "I didn't know I was doing that for a long time. And then I did know it, and I kept doing it anyway, because it turned out to be a good standard." The store was completely quiet. "I would like," he said, "to keep doing it, in person, for whatever time you're willing to give me to make the case." He looked at her steadily. "I'm not asking you to decide about Wyoming or the ranch or any of that. I'm asking you to let me stay. For another month. And let me keep showing you who I am. And at the end of that month you tell me honestly what you see." Silence. Clara's hands were flat on the counter. She breathed. "1 month," she said. "1 month. And then I give you an honest answer. Whatever that answer is." She looked at him. This man who had walked toward her for 20 years and arrived with nothing but patience and consistency and the specific, irreplaceable quality of meaning exactly what he said. "1 month," she said. Something in him settled, quietly, without performance. "Thank you," he said. He started to turn. "Ethan?" He stopped. She looked at him for a moment. And then she did something she had not planned to do. Something that bypassed the ledger in her mind entirely, and came from that unlocked compartment she'd stopped pretending was still closed. "The morning coffee," she said. 6:45 tomorrow." He looked at her. "I'll be here," he said. She nodded, picked up her pen. He left. She stared at the ledger page for approximately 10 seconds, and then, very quietly, in the privacy of her own store on a Thursday morning in June, Clara Whitmore allowed herself one small, real, completely unguarded smile. She wasn't ready for what came next, but she was done pretending she didn't want to find out what it was. The month did not unfold quietly. Clara had expected, or perhaps told herself she expected, a gradual, measured progression. 2 careful people moving deliberately toward a conclusion they both understood was coming. Orderly, logical. The way she preferred things to move. What she got instead was life, which had never once consulted her preference for order. It started on day 3 of the new month, when Ruth Henderson came into the store at 8:30 in the morning, with her youngest pressed against her hip and her face doing something complicated. "I need to tell you something," Ruth said. Clara had heard those words enough times in the past weeks to feel a specific kind of tired at them. "Tell me," she said. "There's a woman," Ruth said, "arrived on last night's stage. Asked specifically at the depot for the Henderson boarding house. Asked specifically for Ethan Caldwell by name." The store went very quiet. Clara's pen did not stop moving. She was proud of that. "Did she say who she was?" Clara asked. "She gave her name as Margaret Voss." Ruth paused. "She's young, maybe 25. Pretty in that polished way that doesn't look like it came from hard living." Clara finished the number she was writing. "All right," she said. "Clara. Thank you for telling me, Ruth." She looked up. "Is there anything else you need this morning?" Ruth looked at her with the particular sympathy of a woman who understood she was being managed. "Salt," Ruth said. "And you're welcome." Clara sold her the salt and stood at the window after she left and thought very precisely about nothing. She cleared her mind the way she cleared a surface, everything off, then a look at what remained underneath. What remained was a question she hadn't known to ask. She had spent a month watching Ethan Caldwell, listening to him, eating supper with him, twice more, receiving his coffee cups and his returned books, and his consistent, quiet, undemonstrative presence. She had been building a picture. She had not considered that the picture might have pieces she hadn't been given. She did not go looking for him. She opened the store and ran it and waited to see what the day brought, because Clara Whitmore did not chase information. She let it arrive, and she assessed it when it did. He came in at noon. Alone. Without the easy forward steadiness she'd come to recognize as his baseline. He came in carrying something, and she knew before he opened his mouth that he knew she knew, because Ruth Henderson could not be expected to keep a thing like this between herself and one person. "You heard," he said. "This morning," she said. He put his hat on the counter. "Her name is Margaret Voss," he said. "I knew her in Wyoming 2 years ago. He stopped. "We spent time together. It was serious enough that I should have been more careful about how I ended it." Clara kept her face neutral. "And how did you end it?" He met her eyes. "Badly," he said. "I told her the truth, which was that I couldn't offer her a future I could mean. But I said it at the wrong time and in the wrong way, and I left her with less dignity than she deserved." He exhaled. "I'm not proud of it." "Why is she here?" "I don't know yet. I haven't spoken to her." "You need to speak to her." "I know. Today, Ethan." "I intend to." Clara looked at him steadily. "Is there anything else?" she asked. "Any other pieces of Wyoming that might arrive on a stage?" It landed harder than she meant it to, and she knew it by the way something tightened in his face. "No," he said quietly. "There isn't." "All right." "Clara, handle it," she said. Not unkindly, but without softness either. "Whatever she needs to hear from you, give her that. And then tell me what happened, directly. Not through Ruth Henderson." "Yes," he said. He picked up his hat. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the pieces of my life that arrived before I had the chance to prepare you for them." She looked at him. "I don't need to be prepared," she said. "I need to be told." He left. She went back to her ledger. Her handwriting, she noticed, was worse again. He came back at 4 o'clock. He looked like a man who had navigated something difficult and hadn't enjoyed the navigation. She came because she thought... He stopped. Started again. She'd heard I'd left Wyoming. She thought it meant I was running. She thought if she found me before I disappeared into somewhere else, she could... Another pause. She wanted me to reconsider. Reconsider. What I'd said when I ended things. Clara looked at him carefully. "And what did you tell her?" "That I couldn't reconsider," he said. "That I was sorry for the pain I'd caused her. that she deserved someone who could be fully present for her, and that man wasn't me. He looked directly at Clara. And that I was in Willow Creek for reasons I hadn't been in a position to explain to her 2 years ago, but that those reasons were real, and I intended to see them through. You told her about me. I told her there was someone. He held her gaze. I didn't use your name. That wasn't mine to give her without asking you first. Clara absorbed this. Is she all right? She asked. He blinked, slightly surprised by the question, which told her something about where his mind had been and where hers was. She will be, he said. She's not fragile. She's angry, which is fair. She'll leave tomorrow. Clara nodded. Ethan, she said. Yes. The thing that concerns me is not the woman. She put her pen down. The thing that concerns me is that I didn't know she existed until she walked off a stage. I know. You've been very honest with me about the things I asked about, but there are things I didn't know to ask, and those are the ones arriving unannounced. You're right. His voice was low. Completely right. And I can't justify it except to say that I was selective about which parts of the last 20 years were relevant to what I was trying to do here, and that selectiveness wasn't fair to you. She studied him. Full picture, she said. That's what I asked for. Yes. So give it to me, not the version that shows you well. All of it. He pulled out the chair and sat down, and he told her. He talked for 1 hour and 20 minutes. Clara did not interrupt once. He told her about his 20s, the restlessness of them, the poor decisions, the 2 years he'd spent with men who operated in legal gray areas, and the specific point at which he'd recognized what he was becoming and walked away from it. He told her about the woman before Margaret, who he had treated carelessly, and the one before that, and what the pattern of those years said about who he'd been before he found his way back to himself. He told her about the land dispute with Cole from the beginning, not just the legal resolution, but what preceded it, the years of building something and watching someone try to take it, and the rage he'd felt, and how he'd managed that rage, and sometimes hadn't managed it, and what that had cost him. He told her about being lost, in detail, without softening it. Clara listened to all of it. When he finished, the store was fully dark outside the window, and she had not lit the evening lamp yet. She was quiet for a long moment. Thank you, she said. For what? For telling me the parts that don't make you look good. He said nothing. I have lived 30 years in a small town, she said quietly. I have watched marriages made on the basis of the best version of a person. I have watched those marriages go to pieces when the rest of the version showed up. She looked at him. I would rather have the whole person from the beginning. Even the bad parts. Especially the bad parts. She paused. Because the bad parts are where I find out if someone can be honest. And honest matters more to me than perfect. He looked at her across the dim store. Clara, he said. And then nothing else. Just her name with everything attached to it. She stood up. Light the lamp, she said. And then I'm going to make coffee, and you're going to tell me something good. Something from Wyoming that wasn't about trouble. He stood, found the lamp. Ike lost the other 2 fingers on his right hand in February, he said. But he can still rope better than any man I've ever watched. She stopped. She laughed. An actual laugh, short and real and surprised out of her, and he turned toward the sound with something in his face that she would think about later at home in the dark, the expression of a man hearing something he has been toward for a very long time. She made coffee. He told her better things. She decided quietly, and without announcing it, that the month was going well. The second week brought a different kind of test, one that had nothing to do with Ethan's past and everything to do with who Clara was when the ground moved under her. Her father took ill on a Wednesday, not seriously, a chest complaint that the doctor said would resolve with rest and warmth, and was nothing to fear in a man his age, if managed carefully. But her father was 67, and the chest complaint was a reminder that 67 existed. And Clara absorbed that reminder the way she absorbed most difficult things, practically on the outside, not practically at all on the inside. She kept the store running. She visited him twice a day. She managed the worry the way she managed everything, by giving it no quarter to expand. Ethan noticed. He always noticed things. She had accepted this as a characteristic of the man. He paid attention the way some people breathed automatically continuously without making a show of it. On the second day of her father's illness, he appeared at the store at noon with soup. Not purchased from the Willow Creek kitchen, but made. She could tell from the specific smell of it that someone had cooked it from an actual pot with actual intention. "You made this," she said. "Ruth let me use the kitchen." "You can cook?" "A man alone for 20 years learns to cook or he eats badly." He set it on the counter. "For your father, or for you, whichever." She looked at the soup. She was not going to cry over soup. She was a 30-year-old businesswoman, and she was not going to cry over soup. She didn't cry. But she looked up at him and said, "Thank you." And the way she said it carried more than soup in it, and they both knew it. "How is he?" Ethan asked. "Stubborn about resting. Better than yesterday." She paused. "He asked about you." Ethan went still. "Your father knows I'm here. My father reads the room of this town like a ledger," she said. "He's known you were here since day 2. He didn't say anything because he was waiting to see what I'd do." She picked up the soup. "He said, and I'm quoting directly, that Caldwell boy always had good instincts. Ask him if he still does." Ethan looked at her. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I was conducting an assessment." Something moved across his face. Not quite a smile. Warmer than a smile. "I'd like to meet him," Ethan said, "if he's willing." "He's willing," she said. "He told me to bring you Saturday." She watched him absorb this, the specific significance of being brought to meet her father, which in Willow Creek in 1887 was not a casual social event, and both of them understood exactly what it meant. "Saturday," he said. 10 o'clock. Don't bring soup. He hates being treated like he's fragile." "What should I bring?" She thought about her father, a man who had built a store from nothing, who read the Bible and the almanac with equal seriousness, who had opinions about cattle futures and scripture and the proper way to shoe a horse. "Bring your own opinions," she said. "He'll argue with you about everything. If you hold your ground politely, he'll respect you. If you fold, he'll decide you're not worth his time." Ethan nodded slowly. "And if I'm worth his time?" She looked at him. "Then I expect he'll tell me so." She paused. "And that will matter to me." She turned back to her inventory. He left without another word. Which was, she thought, exactly right. Saturday came with the particular stillness of mornings that carry weight. Ethan arrived at 9:58. He was wearing his cleanest clothes, which on a cattleman translated to a shirt that had not seen a fence line recently and boots that had been worked on. He had his hat in his hand. Clara looked at him. "Ready?" she asked. "No," he said honestly. She almost smiled. "Good," she said. "Neither am I." They walked to her father's house together, which was 3 streets from the store, and the town of Willow Creek noted this with the collective attention it applied to significant events, which Clara knew and didn't bother pretending otherwise. Her father, Robert Whitmore, was sitting up in the chair the doctor had moved into the front room for exactly this kind of enforced rest. He was a man who had clearly been impressive once and had aged into impressiveness of a different kind, the kind that came from surviving things and knowing it. He looked at Ethan the way Clara looked at ledgers. "Sit down," he said. Ethan sat. "You're the Caldwell boy." "Yes, sir." "You've been gone 20 years." "Yes, sir." "And you came back to my daughter." "I came back to Willow Creek," Ethan said. "And to ask your daughter if she'd be willing to know me again. Those aren't the same thing." Robert Whitmore looked at him for a long moment. "No," he said. "They're not." A pause. "That's a careful distinction. I think it's an accurate one." Her father shifted in his chair. What do you know about dry land ranching in a bad water year? Ethan blinked. Then he answered. Clara sat in the corner and said almost nothing for the next 2 hours, while her father and this man discussed cattle water rights, weather patterns, the merits of different fence post wood, a passage from Ecclesiastes that her father applied surprisingly specifically to land management, and the question of whether a man could be trusted if he'd never gone hungry. Ethan answered every question directly. He held his ground exactly twice and conceded gracefully 3 times and asked her father 2 questions of his own that her father clearly did not expect and clearly appreciated. At 11:45, her father looked at Clara for the first time since they'd arrived. "Make some coffee," he said. She made coffee. When she came back, her father was telling Ethan something about the winter of 1871 that she had heard before but paid attention to now because of the way Ethan was listening completely, the way he listened to everything without waiting for his turn to speak. She set the coffee down. Her father looked at her over his cup. "He has good instincts," her father said. Clara met his eyes. "I noticed," she said. Robert Whitmore looked at Ethan. "My daughter is the most capable person I know," he said. "She is also the most stubborn. She will make up her own mind about everything regardless of what anyone tells her, including me, which I raised her to do and occasionally regret." Ethan nodded seriously. "I've noticed," he said. Her father looked between them. "I'm tired," he said. "Go away now. Come back Tuesday." Ethan stood, extended his hand. Her father shook it, which Clara understood was its own kind of verdict. They walked back to the store in the midday quiet. Neither of them spoke for a block and a half. Then Ethan said, "He told me to come back Tuesday." "I heard." "Is that—" "Yes," she said. "That means what you think it means." He was quiet for another half block. "Clara." She stopped walking. He stopped beside her. "I need to write to my foreman about the offer," he said. "I can't leave it open indefinitely. He needs an answer." She looked at him. "What answer do you want to give?" she asked. "I want to decline it," he said. "I want to tell them the property isn't for sale, and I'm not leaving Wyoming to come back empty-handed, but I'm also not going back to stay." He held her gaze. "I want to propose a different thing. I want to keep the Wyoming operation running with Ike managing it, and I want to look at whether there's land here, near Willow Creek, that I could build something on." Her heart did something it had been threatening to do for weeks. "That's a significant decision," she said. "I know." "Made before I've given you my answer at the end of the month." "Yes." "Why?" He looked at her steadily. "Because it's the right decision regardless," he said. "Because I've been here 6 weeks, and I know this is where I want to be. And I'm not going to make my property decisions contingent on your answer, because that would be pressure, and I told you I'd never pressure you." He paused. "But I'm also not going to pretend I'm not making decisions. You asked for the full picture. That's part of it." She stared at him. "You're going to buy land near Willow Creek," she said, "if I can find the right piece." "Before I've said a word." "Yes." "That is either very confident or very reckless." "I've been both in my life," he said. "I'm trying to be something different this time." A pause. "Certain about what I want, even when the outcome isn't guaranteed." Clara stood on the main street of the town she had run for 10 years in front of the store her father had built, and she had kept looking at the man who had carried a childhood promise for 20 years and arrived with it intact. "Write to your foreman," she said. His breath released slightly. "And Ethan." "Yes. Orville Steen has been wanting to sell the north quarter of his land for 2 years," she said. "He hasn't found a buyer he likes. Creek access, good winter shelter room to run 200 head comfortably." He looked at her. "Are you telling me to talk to Orville?" "I'm telling you a fact about available land near Willow Creek," she said. "What you do with that information is entirely your own decision." She walked into the store. He stood on the street for a moment. Then she heard him laughing quiet, real the laugh of a man who had gotten the answer he needed in the form he should have expected. She allowed herself a small, private, completely unobserved smile behind the counter. 3 days before the month was up, everything broke open. It came from a direction she hadn't been watching, which was the direction things always came from. Agnes Mercer Daniels' wife, the woman who'd been buying unnecessary thread for 6 weeks, while collecting information, wrote a letter. Not to Clara. To Mrs. Catherine Hale of the Territorial Women's Society in Helena, a woman whose opinion shaped county reputation, the way weather shaped soil. Clara found out about the letter because Ellen Bryce told her, having heard it from the Mercer household's kitchen girl who was 17 and didn't understand that some information had destinations. The letter, as reported, suggested that Clara Whitmore had been conducting herself in a manner unbecoming of her station, entertaining a man of uncertain character at her home and in her store. After hours making business decisions influenced by romantic feeling rather than sound judgment, and generally setting a poor example for the younger women of Willow Creek, who looked to her as a model of independent respectability. Clara read the reported contents of this letter twice in her head. Then she went to find Agnes Mercer. She found her at the milliner's. "Agnes," she said. Agnes turned. Her expression went through 3 things quickly: surprise, guilt, and then the particular reconstruction of a person who had decided on a defense before they needed it. "Clara," she said, "walk with me." Agnes walked. They went outside and Clara turned to face her, and she used the voice she almost never used. Quiet, absolutely level, with nothing behind it that Agnes could grab onto and use. "I don't know exactly what you wrote," Clara said. "But I know you wrote it, and I know why, and I need you to understand something." Agnes opened her mouth. "I'm not finished," Clara said. Agnes closed it. "I have run the only general store in this town for 10 years, Clara said. "I have given your family credit 7 times when your harvest was short. I have sat with you when your children were sick. I have kept this community in the particular way a woman keeps a community, without credit, without title, without anyone noticing until it stopped." She paused. "I am going to ask you one time to write a second letter to Mrs. Hale, clarifying that your first letter was based on misunderstanding and community gossip, rather than any direct knowledge of my conduct." Agnes stared at her. "And if I don't?" Agnes said, not defiantly, genuinely asking. "Then I will personally write to Mrs. Hale with a full accounting of what I have actually done in this community for 10 years and allow her to make her own assessment." Clara held her gaze. "And you will have made an enemy of me, which you have not had to be, and which I would very much prefer you didn't become." The silence between them was not comfortable. Agnes looked at the ground. "Daniel doesn't know I wrote it," she said quietly. "I know." "He'd be—" She stopped. "Probably," Clara agreed. Agnes was quiet for a long moment. "I was afraid," Agnes said. "It came out small, real. The defense had collapsed, and what was under it was surprisingly ordinary. A woman afraid of a change she hadn't chosen." Clara looked at her. She understood fear. She understood the specific fear of watching something familiar become something else of the ground, shifting without your consent. "Agnes," she said, more gently, "write the letter." Agnes nodded. The letter was written the next day. Clara didn't ask to see it. She trusted the outcome the way she trusted most things she'd handled directly. Daniel came to the store that evening. He stood at the counter. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't. She shouldn't have. No." He was quiet for a moment. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine." She paused. "Daniel." "Yes." "I need you to know that whatever I decide, and I'm going to decide something, I'm going to make a real choice, it's going to be mine. Nobody's letter and nobody's opinions are going to move me in any direction that isn't the one I've chosen." He looked at her. "I know that," he said. "I've known that about you since the day I met you." She nodded. He put his hat on. "For what it's worth," he said at the door, "the land north of Orville's Creek property is good land." She looked at him. Something in his face was the most honest she'd ever seen him. "I looked at it myself once," he said quietly. "Couple years back. Thought about buying it. A pause. Couldn't figure out what I was building it for. He left. Clara stood alone in the store, 2 days left in the month, and she already had known for more days than she wanted to count exactly what her answer was. She was simply taking the remaining 2 days to make sure the knowing was settled bone deep, the way she settled everything completely without reservation, without the possibility of walking it back. She owed him that. She owed herself that. She went home. She slept. For the first time in a month, she slept cleanly through the night, without a single conversation rehearsed against the dark, that she thought was probably its own kind of answer. The last day of the month fell on a Friday. Clara was up before 5. Not because she couldn't sleep, she had slept the clean, untroubled sleep of someone whose mind had finished its work. She was up because there were things she needed to do before she did the one thing the whole month had been building toward, and she had never once in her life arrived at an important moment without her house in order first. She opened the store at 6:30. She did the morning inventory. She wrote 3 outstanding letters she'd been postponing. She served 4 early customers with the pleasant efficiency of someone whose attention was technically present and actually somewhere else entirely. At 6:43 the bell rang. She didn't look up. "You're 3 minutes late," she said. "The Henderson rooster didn't cooperate," Ethan said. She looked up then. He was standing in this doorway with his hat in both hands, and the particular expression of a man who knew today was the day, and had arrived at it without pretending it was anything else. She studied him for a moment. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She poured 2 cups of coffee, and brought them to the window, and sat across from him, the way they had sat dozens of times over the past 2 months. Except that today, the air between them was different, charged, and still, simultaneously the way the valley went still, just before weather broke. She set his cup in front of him. She looked at him directly. "I've been 30 years old for 4 months, she said. He watched her. "In those 4 months I've watched my father go from robust to fragile and back to something in between. I've kept a store running through a threat and a rumor campaign, and a woman arriving on a stage, and a land offer from Colorado, and the opinions of approximately everyone in this county." She paused. "And I've watched you." "I know," he said. "I've watched you every day for a month, and before that for 3 weeks, and what I've found is consistent." She held his gaze. "You tell the truth. You do what you say. You show up on time. You work when nobody's watching. And when you've done something badly, you say so without making me drag it out of you." He didn't speak. "That's not a romantic speech," she said. "I know that." "It's better than a romantic speech," he said quietly. "It's what I have," she said. "I'm not a woman who says things she doesn't mean, so I won't say things that sound good if they're not what I actually know to be true." She set down her cup. "What I know to be true is that the past 2 months have been the most complicated and the most real I can remember, and that I haven't once wished you'd stayed in Wyoming." He went very still. "Ethan," she said, "I'd like you to talk to Orville Stain." The stillness broke. Something moved through his face. Not surprise exactly, because he had known her long enough now to know how she communicated, but the specific relief of a man hearing confirmation of something he'd been holding his breath against, doubting. "About the North Quarter," he said. "About the North Quarter." He exhaled. Just that. One slow exhale, like a man who had been carrying something a very long distance and had finally set it down. "Clara," he said. "Don't," she said. "Don't make a speech. I can't stand speeches." He pressed his lips together. She could see him managing the impulse. "All right," he said. "Good. Can I say one thing?" She looked at him. "One thing." He reached across the table and took her hand. Not the way he'd touched it once before, briefly at the counter pulled back before it became what it was. He took it fully, his hand covering hers, warm and certain, and not going anywhere. "I never stopped being glad I made that promise," he said. She looked at their hands. She turned hers over and held his back. "Go talk to Orville," she said. He went. She sat alone in the store for 10 minutes after he left, holding her coffee with both hands, and felt the specific, unfamiliar, completely overwhelming sensation of having chosen something instead of managing it. It was terrifying. It was the best thing she'd felt in years. She went back to work. Ethan talked to Orville Steen that same afternoon. She heard about it from 3 separate sources before evening. Willow Creek's information economy worked faster than the Postal Service when it was motivated, and what she heard was that Orville had shaken Ethan's hand inside 20 minutes, which for Orville was practically instant, because Orville Steen did not shake hands on anything he hadn't turned over 17 times first. When Ethan came to the store at closing time, she could tell by the way he moved that it had gone well. He had a kind of forward energy that surfaced when things were moving in a direction he'd decided on. "Well," she said, "he wants fair value and a neighbor who doesn't let his fence line go to ruin," Ethan said. "I told him I'd never had a fence I didn't maintain." "And he believed you. He said he'd heard about the Halverson fences, said any man who repaired a neighbor's fence twice without being asked knew what a fence was for." Clara thought about that. "That's Orville's version of a character reference," she said. "I gathered." Ethan sat down. "We agreed on terms. I need to wire my bank in Cheyenne. It'll take a week to clear." She looked at him. "You're actually doing it," she said. "Did you think I wasn't? I thought there was a real possibility you'd wake up tomorrow and remember that Wyoming had things here didn't." He looked at her steadily. "Wyoming doesn't have the one thing that matters," he said. She looked away, out the window. "You're going to have to build," she said. "There's nothing on that land but the land." "I know. It'll take 2 winters at least before you're running at anything near your Wyoming capacity." "I know that too." "And Ike and your men. I wrote to Ike last week," he said. "Asked if he'd consider relocating. He said he'd think about it, which from Ike means yes, unless something changes his mind." A pause. "He also said, and I'm quoting directly, 'It's about time you did something about that woman.'" Clara blinked. "He doesn't know me." "He knows about you," Ethan said. "I may have mentioned you, occasionally, over the years." She stared at him. "How many years?" He looked at the ceiling with the expression of a man deciding whether honesty was going to cost him something. "Most of them," he admitted. She sat back in her chair. She thought about a foreman in Wyoming, 3 fingers on one hand, sharp eye for weather, who knew about a woman in Montana because a man had apparently talked about her with some regularity across 2 decades of campfires and early mornings and probably fence repairs. "Ethan Caldwell," she said. "Yes. You talked about me to your foreman." He asked why I never married. He met her eyes without flinching. "I told him there was someone, that I'd left before I had the right to ask anything of her, that if things had been different, I'd have stayed." "That's—" She stopped. "Too much?" he asked. She looked at him. "No," she said. "It's the right amount." The week that followed was the week Willow Creek made up its collective mind, and it did so in the way small towns always made up their minds, not in a single moment, but in an accumulation of small ones that added up to something decisive. Martin Halverson brought Ethan to look at his operation, an invitation that in farming terms was equivalent to handing someone the keys to your house. Orville Steen told his neighbors that the North Quarter had sold to a serious rancher from Wyoming who knew livestock and didn't waste words. Ruth Henderson set an extra plate at the dinner table on the 3 evenings that week that Ethan didn't eat with Clara, which became known to Clara through Ruth's youngest, who was 7 and constitutionally incapable of keeping things. And Daniel Mercer did something that cost him. He came into the store on Wednesday, alone, hat off. "I heard about the Orville land," he said. "News travels," Clara said. "I wanted to say—" He stopped, tried again. "I wanted to say that I think he's going to be a good neighbor to this town." She looked at him. "That's generous, Daniel. It's honest." He looked at his hands. "I'm better at honesty than I am at—" He stopped again. Some other things. She understood what the other things were. You'll find someone, she said. And she meant it not as consolation as genuine belief. Daniel Mercer was a good man who had aimed himself at the wrong person and would aim better when he was aimed elsewhere. He put his hat on. "Take care of yourself, Clara," he said. "I always do." He left. She felt the particular quiet of a door closing on something that had never quite opened, and she let it close cleanly without guilt, because guilt required having done something wrong, and she had done nothing wrong, only lived her own life in the direction she'd chosen. The wire from Cheyenne cleared on Thursday. Ethan came into the store that afternoon looking like a man who had just made the largest financial decision of his life, and was at peace with it in a way that surprised even him. "It's done," he said. "The fund's cleared." "Yes." He sat down. "The land is mine as of noon today." Clara set down her pen. She thought about the North Quarter, the creek access, the winter shelter, the room for 200 head. She thought about what it would look like in a year, in 2 years, in 5, with someone's work laid into it. "What are you going to call it?" she asked. He looked at her. "I thought I'd wait," he said. "On the name." "Wait for what?" "To see what it becomes." A pause. "What we decide it becomes." She held his gaze. "That's very forward of you," she said. "I'm a forward man." The corner of his mouth moved. "When I know what I'm moving toward." She looked at him for a long moment. "Saturday," she said. "What happened Saturday?" "My father is well enough to walk to the cottonwood," she said. "He told me so himself yesterday. He wants to see at the old tree. He hasn't been out there in years." Ethan went still. Their cottonwood. The one with the initials. The one she had not been to visit since she was a child, because some things you stayed away from until you were ready for what they meant. "Saturday," he said. "I thought—" She paused. "I thought you might walk with us." He looked at her with the expression she had been learning to read, the one that meant he was feeling something real and managing not to overstate it, because he was the kind of man who understood that overstatement cheapened things. "I'd like that," he said. "Good." She went back to her pen. 6 o'clock tomorrow. Don't be 3 minutes late this time. I'll speak to the rooster." She didn't smile, but only barely. Saturday morning arrived clear and cool, with the particular quality of light that came in late summer, when the season had begun its slow turn, without anyone quite declaring it. Clara's father walked slowly, but without assistance, which he had insisted on, and which Clara had not argued with, because she knew the difference between stubbornness that was harmful and stubbornness that was necessary, and this was the latter. Ethan walked on her father's left side, Clara on his right. The three of them moved through the edge of town and out toward the creek with the unhurried pace that the occasion required. Nobody spoke much. Her father asked Ethan 2 questions about the North Quarter land. Specific questions, the kind that required real answers, and Ethan gave real answers, and her father listened and made the small, considering sound he made when he was updating his opinion of something. Clara walked and said nothing and felt the day very precisely. The cottonwood was exactly where it had always been. Bigger, of course. 20 years of growth added to 20 years already grown when they were children. The bark had the thick, textured quality of a tree that had survived serious weather and intended to survive more. Her father stopped some distance from it. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at Ethan. "You carved something in that tree," he said. "Yes, sir," Ethan said. "I knew about it," her father said. "The day after you left. Clara didn't tell me. I just knew." He was quiet for a moment. "I should have been angry. She was 10 years old." "I know that," Ethan said, "but I wasn't angry." Her father looked at the tree. "Because you were a boy who meant what he said, and those were rarer than they should have been." He paused. "Still are." Ethan said nothing. "I'm going to sit down," her father said, "on that rock for a few minutes." He moved to the flat rock near the creek's edge and sat with the dignity of a man who had chosen to give 2 people something without making a ceremony of it. Clara and Ethan stood at the tree. She looked at the bark. The initials were still there, faded, half absorbed into the growth of 2 decades but present. EC plus CW, in the uneven hand of a 10-year-old with a pocket knife and something important to say. She reached out and traced them with one finger. "You were terrible with a knife," she said. "I was 10. The C is completely crooked. It's your initial. I was nervous." She looked at him. He was watching her with everything open, no management, no careful presentation. Just himself looking at her the way she imagined he'd been looking at the memory of her for 20 years whenever the standard in his head demanded it. "I want to ask you something," he said. "I know you do. Can I ask it?" She looked at the initials, then at him. "I didn't rebuild this thing between us on sentiment," she said. "I rebuilt it because of who you actually are, what you actually did, every morning and every day and everything you told me that was hard to tell." She paused. "I need you to know that before you ask." "I know it," he said. "Then ask." He turned to face her fully. "I want to build something," he said, "on that land. That's worth building, and I want to build it with you, not for you, not around you, but with you. The store stays yours. Your name stays yours. Your life stays yours." His voice was steady and low. "But I want us to be building in the same direction. Together." He held her gaze. "Will you marry me, Clara?" The cottonwood was quiet. The creek moved past. Her father on his rock was looking at the water with the focused attention of a man who was absolutely listening to every word and had the grace to pretend otherwise. Clara looked at Ethan Caldwell, the boy who had carved her name into a tree and kept his word across 20 years, and arrived in her doorway with nothing but patience and the stubborn conviction that some things were worth coming back for. "Yes," she said, not after a pause, not with a speech. Just the word clean and full, and exactly what she meant. Something in his face broke open quietly, the way light came through a door you'd been waiting to open for a very long time. He reached up and touched her face. She put her hand over his. Her father behind them made a sound that was not quite a cough. "I'm not completely blind over here," he said. Clara turned. Her father was looking at them with the expression she hadn't seen on his face in years. Something younger than the rest of him, something that remembered a long time ago. "Well," he said. "He asked," Clara said. "I assumed. What did you say?" "I said yes." Her father looked at Ethan. "You took long enough," he said. 20 years, sir." Ethan agreed. Her father braced himself to stand. "Help an old man up and we'll go back to town and you can feed me something, since you seem to be part of this family now." Ethan helped him up without making a production of it. The 3 of them walked back toward town in the morning light. And somewhere behind them, in the bark of an old cottonwood beside Willow Creek, 2 sets of crooked initials sat in wood that had grown around them, holding them the way living things hold the marks made on them when they were young. Not perfectly, not without change, but permanently, and with a strength that time had only added to. The week that followed moved fast. Word got out before noon. This was Willow Creek, and 3 of them had walked to the creek and back, and only 2 of them were related, and the town's arithmetic was excellent. Ellen Bryce appeared at the store at 1 o'clock with the expression of someone who had already told 5 people, and needed to be the first to tell Clara that she'd told 5 people. "Is it true?" she said. "Yes," Clara said. Ellen sat down uninvited and pressed both hands to her face. "I knew," she said, "from the day he walked back in here. I knew." "You told me to be careful," Clara pointed out. "I also knew," Ellen said with complete serenity. Ruth Henderson brought something baked. Orville Steen sent his daughter with a note that said in its entirety, "Good match." Oh, S. Clara put it in her ledger between 2 pages and kept it there. Martin Halverson came by himself and shook Ethan's hand for a long time. Agnes Mercer sent a note of congratulation that was formally worded, and clearly effortful, and which Clara accepted for what it was the best Agnes could do with what she had, which was enough. Daniel Mercer did not come. But 2 days later, when Clara was opening the store in the early morning, she found a small parcel on the step. Inside was a book, a good one, the kind of binding that meant someone had paid real money for it. The inside cover had 4 words written in Daniel's precise hand. For your lending shelf, no signature. But she knew. She put it on the shelf. She thought it was one of the best things he'd ever done. In the weeks that followed, Ethan began on the North Quarter. He did not wait for the buildings. He started with the fence line, methodical post by post, the way a man staked a claim by marking its edges cleanly. Ike wrote from Wyoming that he'd decided to come, which surprised no one who knew Ike, except Ethan, who had apparently underestimated how thoroughly his foreman had decided Willow Creek was the correct direction. Clara ran the store. She added a table near the window, bigger than the 2 chairs, enough for 4. It became the place where the early morning conversation happened, where Ethan and her father sat on Tuesdays, where Ellen came on Thursdays, where occasionally the Halverson boys came to argue about cattle with someone who could argue back competently. The store had always been the center of the town. Now it was also the center of something else. One evening in October, when the air had turned and the days had shortened, and there was a new quality to the light that made things feel settled and serious in the way of approaching winter. Ethan came in at closing time. She was at the ledger. He sat across from her. Ike arrives next week, he said. Good. The main structure will be ready to winter in. He looked at his hands, calloused again in the specific way of someone who had been working fence and foundation. The foreman's cabin is done. Good, she said again. Clara. She looked up. Are you ready? He asked. For all of this. For what it looks like from here forward. She held his gaze. I've been running a general store in a small town for 10 years, she said. I know what building something looks like. I know what it costs. She paused. I'm not afraid of the cost. I know you're not. Then why are you asking? He looked at her with that open, careful, completely unguarded thing he did when he had stopped managing himself for her benefit and was just himself. Because it matters to me, he said. That you're choosing this because you want it, not because you've decided on it and decided is close enough to wanted. She set down her pen. Ethan Caldwell, she said. Yes. I do not do things I don't want to do. A pause. No, he said. You don't. I chose you because I looked at you for 2 months with every piece of critical judgment I possess and found a man worth choosing. She held his gaze. Not the boy I remembered, not the promise. You, the actual person who showed up. He was quiet. That's the best thing anyone has ever said to me, he said. It's the truth, she said, which is always better than the best thing. She went back to her ledger. He sat across from her in the evening quiet of the store, and they occupied the same space the way 2 people occupied it when they'd stopped being careful about it naturally, without announcement, as if they'd always been arranged this way, and the years apart had been the anomaly rather than the norm. Outside Willow Creek moved through its evening. Horses, a voice calling, the sound of a door. The ordinary sound of a town that kept going regardless of what happened inside it. But inside the store, something had been decided. Something that had taken 20 years to arrive at and 2 months to build properly, and 1 clear word to seal. The story of Ethan Caldwell and Clara Whitmore was not a story about waiting. Clara had not waited. She had lived fully independently on her own terms, and when the right person arrived with the right evidence at the right moment of her own readiness, she had looked at him with open eyes and chosen freely. It was not a story about a promise surviving time either, though the promise had survived. It was a story about 2 people becoming people worth choosing separately through the particular fires of their own years, and arriving at the same place with enough honesty between them to build something real. Years later, when people asked Clara if she'd known from that first morning when she told him 30 seconds and he stayed anyway, she always gave the same answer. I suspected, she said. But I was not going to act on a suspicion. I needed proof. And did she get it? She would look at the man across the room, or across the table, or across the fence line, or across the 30 years they eventually built together. And the answer was in her face before she said it. "Every single day," she said. "Some promises are made at 10 years old, beneath a cottonwood tree carved in crooked letters by a boy with a pocket knife and something true to say. And some promises are kept not in the moment of return, but in every ordinary morning after it, in the coffee at 6:45, in the truth told, when it was hard in the fence line maintained in the hand taken and not let go." That was the promise Ethan kept. Not with words. With the entire rest of his life.